Once a pre-filling is dried overnight, we start the tape coat. For this coat, we like to thin out the joint compound with just a little water. For the tape coat, start with the recessed joints. Use a 6-inch knife to apply mud along the length of the joint. Flatten your knife out as you move it so that you'll leave an even trail of mud. Now, once you've got mud along the whole joint, press a piece of paper joint tape into it. The mud will hold it in place. Try to center the tape over the joint. And you don't need to be particularly neat about cutting the tape. You can tear it or use your taping knife. Then you embed the tape into the mud, starting at the center of the joint and working toward the ends. You actually end up removing a lot of the mud you first put on, scraping it off back into the tray. You just want to leave a thin layer under the tape. When you're done, there should be a little valley in the joint. This gets filled up with mud on the next two coats.
On the butt joints, where there's no recess in the edges of the sheets, you need to have an even more delicate touch. You apply the mud and embed the tape in the same way as on the tapered joints. To embed the tape on the butt joints, run the knife down each side and then down the middle. You'll find that if you try to do it just down the middle, the tape will slide around and get all crooked. Don't press too hard when you're doing this on a butt joint. You might squeeze out all the mud behind the tape. Unfortunately, when you're finished taping a butt joint, you'll end up with a very slight hump in the middle. This is what makes butt joints so tough later on.
You also apply mud and joint tape to the inside corners where two walls meet, or where the wall meets the ceiling. Drywallers call these angles. Now, when you're doing this, it usually works to load up just one side of the knife. Then you take the tape and put a crease in it. It's designed to fold easily right down the middle. Press the tape gently into the corner. Once the tape is hanging there, take your knife and run it along both sides to embed the tape into the mud. You can press pretty hard when you do this, harder than you do on the flat joints.
On outside corners, you work one side at a time. You load up the mud with a 6-inch knife. Then you run your knife along the bead and the wall to smooth the mud out. As you smooth it out, you can press down a little with the knife. You want to leave a slight depression next to the bead. You'll find that you need to go back every now and then and clean off any globs of mud that stick to the ridge of the bead. The next two coats will finish filling up the depression that's left after this first coat.
Now, you cover a lot of screw and nail heads when you do the joints, but there will usually still be 3 screw heads exposed in the middle of the board just along the joist or stud. You need to mud these too. Since the head is countersunk a little bit, you spread out a little mud and then scrape it off even with the surface of the board. This fills a depression, but as the joint compound dries and hardens, it will shrink a little bit, so it'll be necessary to repeat the process 2 more times. You'll find that you can fill and scrape 2 or 3 nail heads at a time, and that makes this part go pretty quickly. You might find nails or screws that stick up. These are called clinkers because of the sound your knife makes. Some taping knives have a metal knob at the end of the handle. You can often use this to pound down the nail. But lots of times, you'll have to use a screwdriver to drive a screw down far enough. Throughout the day, try to keep the inside of your mud bucket clean so that the dried out chunks don't fall into the joint compound. At the end of the day, sprinkle a little water on the top of the mud. You should pour this water off and mix up the mud again in the morning.